Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Disruptive Fridays. My name is Lieke Ploeger, and I'm the Community Director of the Disruption Network Lab. And today we're happy to host our first Disruptive Fridays edition in the project Facing Disinformation, Media Diversity from Georgia to Germany. So first of all, also many thanks to the German Federal Foreign Office for their support of this work. And this project is part of their expanding cooperation with civil society in the Eastern Partnership countries and Russia, the Eastern Partnership Program. And of course, also big thanks to our project partner, the Regional Democratic Hub Caucasus from Georgia, for being a wonderful project partner and collaborating with us in this project. So within this Facing Disinformation project, we work with experts on disinformation and fake news in Georgia and Germany, and we want to offer insights on how to face disinformation in social media and beyond. So the Regional Democratic Hub Caucasus is currently running a specialized online training course for participants from Georgia and other Eastern Partnership countries. And we will hear more today about this course. And then the Disruption Network Lab is hosting 2 online Disruptive Fridays editions and also a special online workshop in December. So before we get started, just a reminder that we also have a chat on our website, and you can ask your questions to the speakers there at any time. And please don't wait too long. You can post them whenever you want, so we have time to collect them for the Q&A later on. Then I'll introduce the moderator of today, who is also involved in running the online training program and working with us on this project, Alistair Alexander. He's a researcher, trainer, and consultant on technology, art, society, and ecology. And he has previously worked as a tech journalist and organized direct actions for climate and global justice, as well as tech projects and campaigns with NGOs worldwide. So thanks a lot, Alistair, for moderating the Disruptive Fridays today, and handing over to you. I think your microphone is still muted, which is always the classic beginning of Disruptive Fridays.
Of course. I thought I'd continue the tradition. Hi, thank you, Lieke. Yes, thanks for introducing me. And as Lieke mentioned, this project really has 2 halves. One half is the public events, like this Disruptive Friday, and the other half is the training program. And really what we want to do today is dive really into that training program and the content we're looking at with some of the speakers and also some of the guests we have on that. And it's been a really interesting training program so far. We're just short of halfway through it. It runs over 5 weeks. And we've been looking more generally at disinformation and also in the region itself. And we have first of all, we have 2 speakers who are both speakers at the training program itself. Firstly, we have Tamar, and I'll introduce both of them. And then we have Gisela. So Tamar Kintsurashvili is the Executive Director of Media Development Foundation. This is an organization, a research and engagement organization in Georgia. And Tamar is really one of the leading figures around disinformation in the region and beyond. And one of the key projects, which is really worth looking at, I'm sure she'll discuss it a bit more, is called mythdetector.ge. It's in Georgian and in English, so it's a really interesting program for any website for anyone outside Georgia to look at as well. And Tamar is also a member of Deutsche Welle Academy, Media and Information, Deutsche Welle Academy Media and Information Literacy Experts Network. And she's also an associate professor at Ilia State University. So I'll introduce you and then get back to Gisela. So I'll hand over to Tamar now.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I want to share my presentation. Yeah, there are some technical problems, but I will go without presentation. Oh, it's visible. We're Tbilisi-based organization working on disinformation and partnering with Facebook on labeling false content in social networks. We're doing our research in order to map influence actors and to show how narratives are framed, because disinformation activities are often linked to disinformation campaigns, which gives us better understanding of overall context, how hostile actors are operating in our information space. also Georgia is a multi-ethnic, unique country in terms of having one unique language. We have different minorities, and we are differentiating direct Russian propaganda and indirect or anti-Western propaganda, since media consumption habits are different among our citizens. We have two densely populated regions with ethnic minorities, and direct Russian propaganda is more visible in Samtskhe-Javakheti, with ethnic Armenians lacking of knowledge of the state language, while Azerbaijani minorities are more influenced by Turkish and Azerbaijani media sources. So in face of lacking of common communication language, there are different media sources influencing overall Georgian media market. And Georgian media consumers are more skeptical while they are dealing with Kremlin-sponsored media outlets. As you see on the screen, Sputnik Georgia is more popular in neighboring Azerbaijan or Russia rather than in Georgia. That's why there is a so-called deflective source model applied often when real owner of the media outlets or the news is hidden and the receiver of information never associate this news is coming from original source. I'll give you just one example how it operates in local context. The Western media outlets are more trustful according to all surveys. And there is for instance, one disinformation linked to Lugar Lab, which is the Georgian biological lab built with support of US government, and it helps to prevent diseases. It's often targeted by Kremlin politicians or the Russian media outlets. There is a Pennsylvania-based website translating the Moskovsky Komsomolet, which is Russian language media outlets, articles in English, and positioning itself as a English language media outlets, but actually its IP address is located in Moscow and domain is registered in Azerbaijan, which raises question about transparency of this source and intention to spread disinformation targeting the healthcare related issues, and it was especially sensitive during pandemics. I'm trying to go to next slide. There is some technical problem. So you also see here the different Western websites cloned by different actors. Fox News G or Euronews G, Guardian with some spelling mistake, ABC, cloned ABC News or CNN. And when you see the flow of information, it's difficult for ordinary media consumers to filter this information. They are reading headlines and they are looking at the well-known Western brands, and that's why it's easier to mislead audience. For instance, we identified the Russian CNN and BBC with IP addresses located in St. Petersburg, and the stories were about pandemic, how the Harvard professor invented coronavirus, and in overall skepticism toward vaccine hesitancy, this type of information is especially harmful. I think there is a problem. So our goal is to show connections between different actors and to give bigger picture to our audience about the agenda of these actors, since this information is intentional dissemination of harmful information. In order to understand the notion of intention, you should know who stands besides different media outlets or information disseminated virally in our societies. So this mapping exercise is useful resource to give bigger picture. We also track how narratives are framed, which is connection in disinformation cases. I already show some of them. And structure of anti-Western narratives consists of 3 stages. The first one is sowing fears, fear of war, fear of losing territorial integrity, fear of biosubversion or losing identity. This is religion or ethnic or sexual. The second stage is instilling despair and distrust in Western institutions, invest in liberalism overall, saying that the West is not able to protect us. And the third stage is to offering co-religious and powerful Russia as only power who can protect our identity, our territorial integrity, and is useful in this process. And I would like to speak a little bit about the concept of Ruski Mir, which is linked to the identity-related discourse, because often there is the Ruski Mir tries to consolidate former Soviet countries, and not only them, around a common religion and common historic memory. So religion and the disinformation targeting minorities are aimed to create some clashes between people of different identity. And we see the messages stemming from some clerics saying that if Russia attacked Georgia physically, the West tries to destroy our soul by imposing homosexuality or fighting with our tradition and religious values. And it's better to protect our soul rather than to protect our physical well-being. So this is most emotional part of disinformation campaigns, targeting the Western partners. And during pandemic, we are observing anti-liberal groups prizing the coronavirus because it was presented as a punishment of Georgia for its sins and Western orientations, and they were welcoming pandemic because it closed the borders and stopped and prevented migration process. I will stop here due to limited time, and I'm open to your questions.
Tamar, that was absolutely fantastic. I just wondered, just based on that, I mean, a lot of people watching this from outside Georgia and outside the region will be familiar with disinformation in the context of COVID, of course, but also Trump and all these kinds of issues. I was wondering how you see Georgian disinformation campaigns. Are they following the same patterns, or are there some things which are really quite different to other areas? Are there specific things in this region?
Actually, there are many similarities in terms of pandemic, and COVID-related disinformation travels from country to country. But in Georgian context, there is political dimension because of we have seen some cyber attack on Lugar Lab, which is biosecurity lab preventing diseases, and leak of classified documents. And the investigation showed it was linked to Russia. And there is also the strong role of clerics and religion influencing vaccine hesitancy in our society. It's more closed society syndrome. Trump serves as role model for Georgian far rights. It's also similarities, but there is also anti-Turkish sentiments aim to shift focus from current security challenges to historic one. Georgia has large Muslim community, including Georgian Muslims, and part of Georgia was occupied by Ottoman Empire 1 century ago. And pro-Kremlin actors are also manipulating on this topic, trying to trigger historic trauma, saying if Russia is occupied, why not Turkey, referring to historic occupation from Ottoman Empire. And many disinformation cases are linked to Georgian Muslims with intention to create clashes between Georgian Orthodox and Georgian Muslims, which is quite alarming trends, and intention is to harm society and dissolve Georgia, and Russia is presented as only power who can defend our territorial integrity. Microphone is muted. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? That was actually on.
Yes.
That's really interesting, Tamar. I hope we have time for some more questions later on. And I want to move to our second speaker, who I'm really happy to see here, which is Gisela Pérez de Acha. Gisela, I've known her some years. She's a long-standing campaigner, activist, and also human rights lawyer. But more recently, she's been all of her experience and knowledge in those areas as an investigative reporter, an open source journalism researcher at the Berkeley Human Rights Center, world-renowned for its work on disinformation and also open source investigation. And Gisela also is a trainer at the Amnesty International's Digital Verification Corps, and she'll be talking about conflict in different regions such as South America and possibly the US as well. So Gisela, can I hand over to you now?
Of course. Hi, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it's usually such a different place that I'm used to from what I'm used to speak in. So let me pull up the internet clicker. Okay, can you see this? Yes, right? Awesome. Well, I wanted to start talking a little bit about the Human Rights Center and what we do. Thanks so much for that presentation, Alistair. Human Rights Center, we basically, as Alistair very well said, we use open source material to verify disinformation or verify alleged facts in war zones and regions of conflict. So first of all, a quick definition of what open source investigations are. Open source investigations are pretty much, we pick everything that is publicly available. We don't hack, we don't trespass any private property, so to speak, but we do grab social media information, videos, images, and then we try to work with that to and put facts forward. What you're seeing here on the screen, it's a process that has been ongoing at the Human Rights Center since 2017. I'm part of the investigations lab at the Human Rights Center, which is sort of like the training ground for students and professionals into open source investigations. My colleagues, Lindsay Freeman and Alexa Koenig, have recently launched the Berkeley Protocol on Digital Open Source Investigations. So for anyone in the room with a law enforcement or prosecution background, this is the document that has set the standards, has been adopted at a UN level, and has set the standard for how to collect, preserve, verify, and fact-check information for it to be accepted in courts of law. And I will talk a little bit about that further down, in my presentation. So the next slide here are just some of the principles. For the sake of time, I can't really touch upon all of them, but it's very broad normative principles that are applicable to ideally any conflict, and it's more has to do with the standard of evidence and the securing of the chain of command and potential evidence that we would want to present in international courts. That said, I would like to introduce two examples, two definitions in different instances. For example, one is verification, and the other is fact-checking. It's really not the same. Verification, as you can see a little bit in this image, verification is when we use satellite imagery to compare to the ground footage that has been uploaded by either survivors in a conflict or anyone else present in a zone of conflict. We use this a lot, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, to actually assess if something happened where people are saying it's happened, and to figure out the exact coordinates of when it happened. Once we have the exact coordinates of when it happened, we can take the shadow of lamps and posts to measure what approximate time it is when that event happened. And, oh, sorry, a little technical difficulty. So can you, it seems like I lost connection, but hopefully you can see the slide still. Okay, awesome. Thank you. So getting the facts right for the protection, why is it important? First of all, and let me talk a little bit about the Latin American conflict to start with. First of all, for the protection of human rights, one thing that we do the most is actually monitor protests. Monitor protests for, especially in cases in Latin America and presently in the United States, especially last year, especially in the United States in 2020. One of the things that happens the most is where we get the most video during civil unrest, moments of civil unrest, where there's just such breadth of material, and there's so much material that one of our jobs is actually to verify and fact check what happened in that time frame, put the time frame together. And we especially pay a lot of attention in police abuse, police retaliation, and the potential use of lethal forces, or the disproportional use of force in issues and instances of protests. So one of the things here, and listening to the previous presentation, one of the things that comes to mind is, for example, in Latin American countries, one thing that we always look for is weapons, and if we can see who manufactured those weapons. For example, in the recent Colombia conflict, after the president cut down taxes for the rich and wanted to increase taxes for poor and middle classes, one thing that became really evident, and that became a hypothesis for research, was in fact potential US manufactured weapons being used by the police to repress protests. During the Black Lives Matter movement, the second iteration of the Black Lives Matter movement last year in 2020, after George Floyd's now accurately say murder, a lot of the disinformation had to do with if actually was it Antifa, right? This really loose collective of people sharing a far left ideology, or was it really in a big problem that we encountered is extremist groups posing as Antifa members or alleged Antifa members that were sowing disinformation and planting wrong facts for with an accelerationist mentality, meaning they are ready for the collapse of society and they want to accelerate it so that they are the side with the most guns and can win. So this plays out in the United States, but in Latin America, really, we have been seeing more recently. It's also, and let me go forward a couple of slides. Hopefully, we're seeing the same thing. Getting the facts right, for example, in the Venezuelan context, it's not only for history in the making, but it also has huge geopolitical consequences. I'm linking here to a video from the visual investigations of the New York Times they did this fantastic reconstruction of one allegedly back in, I think it was 2018, there was a blockage in a bridge where aid was coming, where aid was coming for Venezuelan nationals. And the thing with this is they were actually able to prove that it was not Maduro's regimes. It was not Maduro's people who set some aid trucks on fire. The question was, were these trucks set on fire by Maduro because he didn't want any? Maduro is now a president accused of authoritarian practices. Was it actually Maduro who lit the humanitarian aid buses on fire, or was it actually someone else? Was it actually a mistake? And they actually found out that it was a protester who accidentally just jogged a ball of fire into the humanitarian aid bus. And this had huge geopolitical consequences because it meant then, and a lot of media picked it up, I think one of the things that becomes really interesting and important also is thinking about disinformation as a way of circular reporting, right? In this particular case of Venezuela, the press had picked up what sources from or the internet or experts were saying, but actually no one had really paid a really close attention to what it was actually happened, and a lot of international press had to issue a retraction. So all this to say that getting facts right it's something that is possible, but it's something that we have to work on together, and that's why the Human Rights Center Investigation Lab believes in education, and especially educating newer generations for digital literacy and both verification, fact checking, and developing a critical eye in the information environment. I'm going to stop there for the sake of time. Apology, tech glitches.
So much, Gisela, for pushing through. Not again. Oh, it's okay now? Oh, sorry. I've got a fault with my microphone because, anyway, we'll have to go through with that as well. But Gisela, could I ask you a couple of questions? I think it was so interesting that you're looking at sort of conflict regions, but also, contested regions and civil disturbances as well, such as shootings and protests, as well as like actual sort of cross-border conflicts. I was wondering if what are the similarities and differences in terms of investigation and the shaping of the narrative between those two different types of situation and scenarios?
That's a really good question. I specialize in Latin America, so I'll speak of the Latin American region. But one of the things that we see in Latin America, and I don't know, it's very similar to the alt-right in the United States, is that there's a lot of organic followers. Let's say in the United States, there's a lot of organic followers to President or former President Donald Trump, right? So it's not necessarily that it is. Yes, there's a lot of misinformation, but it's also a disinformation that has been sort of like internalized, psychologically internalized by QAnoners, for example. And in Latin America, what happens is that there's also authoritarian-like figures that have a lot of support, a lot of organic support from the population. And we see that it's them sowing this disinformation and sort of like seeing it grow. But on the other hand, I would totally have to agree with Tamar, because COVID-related disinformation just seems to be translated and viralized from country to country. There's a lot of websites now, a lot of them based in Spain, our research and investigation that is just translating, hosting and translating a lot of English-speaking disinformation into Spanish. So I think especially in this post-colonial time in Latin America, we have way too much influence from the United States. So our internet really much resembles that, but with the aggravated issue of, first of all, huge inequalities, and second of all, a right and a left that are not really fitting into the right and left spectrum in the same way that the US. It's much more fluid, it's much more nuanced. We have, for example, in Mexico, an alleged leftist president who is also not pro-feminist rights, reproductive rights, and that is also not pro a free press that criticizes him. So there's a lot of conflicting values, and this is also becomes really evident in disinformation campaigns, just in the way that the alt-right supports, for example, Trump. We have an alt-left supporting Maduro and, for example, President López Obrador in Mexico.
That's really interesting. And what I want to do now is open it up a little bit to our other speakers. So as part of this training program, one of the really important things about it is that not only do we have speakers coming in to talk about their perspectives and their research, we also have an amazing group of participants in the region, all of them working in different organizations, networks, campaigns, who see disinformation in their everyday lives. So we thought it'd be really helpful to bring in some of our participants. And it's very much how we want to see this training program and this project as a whole. It's not about teaching people. It's actually a conversation between a number of people with their own perspectives and sharing that information across borders. So with that in mind, I want to introduce a couple of people. The first one would be Guli Bekirishvili, who is a young European ambassador, and she's also a researcher and communication coordinator as well. And she's joining us from Tbilisi, I assume. And if you can, I just wanted to ask you, Guli, I mean, where have you experienced disinformation in the work and in your work, and also actually in your life in general?
Thank you, Alistair, for the invitation. Well, speaking of disinformation, Russian propaganda and disinformation is an integral part of Russia's hybrid war toolkit, and Georgia is one of the main targets of Russian disinformation warfare because of its declared pro-Western orientation. While I was monitoring Georgian media platforms as a fact-checker, I have encountered numerous fake news and disinformation, and I understood that the disinformation narratives have a clear anti-Western agenda. For one of the main targets of Russian disinformation is Europe, the European, portrayed as a danger to Georgian identity, while Russia intends to represent itself as a savior and the guardian of traditional values and the Orthodox Christianity in the region. Through media platforms and organizations, propaganda is carried out in several ways through Russia's own agencies and televisions, local media outlets, and Russia-founded political and non-governmental organizations. Well, generally, propaganda is spread by Georgian language working media because Russian language is not dominant in Georgia. And also, generally speaking, in Georgia, disinformation challenges the integrity of democratic processes, be it elections or everyday public debate. The long-term effect of disinformation is the slow erosion of trust in society towards the media, politicians, public institutions, and the objective is to weaken Georgia's state institutions, discredit Western institutions such as the European Union and the NATO with the purpose to change the public opinion against them. Russia tries to instill confusion, fear, hatred among the population by making up and spreading conspiracy theories. In that sense, the training program Facing Disinformation Insights and Strategies to Counter the Online Information Pandemic is crucial for our society, and it is designed to strengthen media diversity and support its pluralism in Georgia, connecting experts such as journalists of traditional and non-traditional media, working with experts on disinformation and fake news in Georgia and Germany. Now, the project will offer important insights on how to face disinformation in social media and beyond. And therefore, it is very essential for our society to have an insight around such topics. And alongside the talks, there are discussions, debates, and workshops where, as participants, we can share our experience, thoughts, and work collaboratively with speakers and facilitators. Therefore, I strongly believe that training will equip participants with the necessary tools and tactics to discern disinformation and to identify fake news easily in social networks. At the end, huge thanks to Disruption Network Lab and RDH-Caucasus for this excellent opportunity. Thanks.
Yeah, no, my mic it's just broken. Can you hear it now? Yeah. Okay. That's a lot of expectations for us to live up to, Guli. Thank you for that very praise, that incredible praise for us. And we have also with us, we have Vasiko Kurova, who's also a student at Tbilisi State University, and he's also participating in our Facing Disinformation course as well. So can I ask you the same question, Vasiko? What is your experience of disinformation in your work? Have you got background noise there? Okay, is that from Vasco?
Well, I'm sure I can just speak over the sounds. And thank you, Alistair. And thanks to Disinformation Network Lab for this opportunity to speak about this topic and also for the project that you introduced to society. My experience about disinformation mainly surrounds the topics of COVID-19 and the pandemics that we are facing today. Anti-vaxxer disinformation targets only the vaccines that are produced in Western countries, and these are the main narratives of Georgian anti-vaxxers. We hear absurd allegations on vaccines like Pfizer, Moderna, and etc., and we don't hear much about vaccines such like Sputnik or Sinopharm, the vaccines that are mainly produced in Russia or in China. And this is the main idea of the disinformation that Georgians face. These disinformation campaigns really try to undermine trust in Western institutions and also weaken the unity of Georgian society. We hear allegations like that vaccines, that Pfizer and Moderna cause infertility in women, for example, in 10 years' time. We hear also allegation that Russo-Georgian war that happened in 2008 was started by Georgia, and Georgia military actually bombed its own citizens using cluster bombs, which is absurd allegations, but yet still they have huge effects on Georgian society. For example, in regards to the pandemic, only 25% of the population is vaccinated, and we report 5,000 daily cases of COVID cases. So the situation is not great, and it's quite disastrous. So this is why I encourage my friends and even acquaintances to participate in programs like this. So we have to raise awareness on this subject, and we have to fight these disinformation campaigns. And in order to fight, we have to really understand the characteristics of these campaigns and etc. Thank you for listening.
And Vasiko also mentions that he's a founder of the civic organization ? And also, Vasiko, what are you hoping to get out of the actual training program itself?
Mainly the information. As you've mentioned, I am one of the founders of the civic organization called ? And we tend to promote critical thinking. And in regards to the challenges that Georgian society faces, I think that this program really helped me to just like focus on the main topics of the disinformation and then spread using this platform and other platforms that are available to me. So that's the main idea of me participating in this project.
That's great. Thank you, Vasiko. And we're open really to questions now. We've got about 20 minutes left. So it'd be really great to hear any questions from the audience, and that will get fed through to us, and we can ask the panel. I just had one question actually, which I was thinking of, as I heard you all, particularly those of you who are Georgia-based, of which we have 3. I was wondering, you talked a lot about disinformation within the Russian context. I wondered if, as a contested region, would you say that all the disinformation in the Georgia and the wider region is Russian-based? Are there any other actors working here? And do you see other sources of disinformation and campaigns as well? Is it a more nuanced picture? I wondered if one of you or some of you could answer that. Tamar, do you have a view on that?
Sure. It's not only Russia. There are local actors also using the social platforms to promote their domestic political agenda. And homegrown local propaganda also contribute to distrust in media, because media, the media outlets critical to government are often targeted, or political opposition, by ruling party affiliated pages. We even revealed the blogger, artificial intelligence blogger, using the picture generated artificially, and he was quoted by traditional online media platform, pro-governmental one, as a real source of information. When we discovered this case and published this story, Facebook page changed his name. He was called Georgi Agapishvili, it's a Georgian name and last name, to artificial intelligence blogger. He was hoping to preserve his Facebook page because it's against Facebook community standards, and he was removed later. But we found this change in transparency section of this particular Facebook page, and he was created against a local businessman targeted by government. So abuse of the media as democratic institution is also domestic challenge. And we are working on these issues too, and we are using verification tools, and geolocation, as it was mentioned by Gisela, is also important resource to verify certain facts and address these problems.
Thank you, Tamar. And I'm wondering, with Guli or Vasico, do you have a view on that? Are there other sources of disinformation that you've seen or witnessed in the work that you've done? Vasico, you seem to be nodding. Do you have a view on that?
Yes, it's not only about Russia. The idea and the structure of Georgian society, we have ethnic minorities that don't quite speak Georgian language, so they are more vulnerable towards media outlets that are not Georgian language based. So we observe, for example, disinformation and misinformation campaigns coming from Azerbaijani media sources and even Irani media sources. So it's not all about Russia, and the scale of this problem really speaks for the importance and the need of Georgian government to step up and improve its counteract measures.
Thank you very much, Vasico. We've got a question from the audience, and it's a good one, actually. It's one I was going to ask anyway, and it's fantastic, or broadly this. It's addressed to Tamar. Which strategies would you suggest to adopt to counter the online information pandemic in Georgia, and how can members of the civic society help and support your work?
Thank you for this question. Actually, our approach to disinformation is first to identify critically assess the content itself, and to identify the source of information. Cooperation with state agencies is also important, because sometimes for verification you need official source to rely on, especially when it concerns of side effects of individuals, and it's a personal data. And we are open to cooperate with other civil society organizations following the transparency rules and the rules we are observing in our work. And I think government should work with different target groups because as studies show, people are more vulnerable to pandemic-related disinformation, which targets their religious feelings. So government should coordinate different influencers, including clerics, to promote this idea that because it's a healthcare issue, and as it was mentioned by Vasiko, the level of vaccination is quite low in Georgia, and when people trust in something based on their beliefs, it's difficult to address by fact-checking. So you need to coordinate these clerics who can approach this topic based on science rather than on anecdotal evidences, because we have some cases where, for instance, when disinformation concerns ingredients of the vaccines, saying there is luciferin in vaccines, that's why it's linked to Satan. So you need clerics, influential clerics, educated one, not influenced by these anecdotal evidences, to influence public opinion, because debunking, fact-checking, media monitoring is useful to identify problem. And with the help of Facebook, we can reduce dissemination of this information and provide alternative sources, but it requires more comprehensive approach and involvement of all stakeholders in this process, including clerics. Unfortunately, in Georgia, only international organizations, UNICEF, and others are working in this direction, and there is, because it's we had elections and it's not popular to go against church because church is influential actors. The trust in church is very high, so no politician will go against this, but it's a public good to have proper health care to protect its citizens. We lost 10,000 people over this pandemic, and we lost less people during 2008 war. It's a real problem, but nobody speaks about this because it's against populist agenda, and government should take responsibility for this action and to coordinate different actors in order to address this problem.
Thank you so much, Tamar. And actually, we've got another question which seems it develops those ideas and themes, and I think it's a perfect one for Gisela, actually. How revealing the truth through forensic open source investigations actually change the perception of the public on specific topics. Is there an impact, or once that the disinformation has circulated, is it very hard to change people's opinions?
Yeah, this is a very good question. And I think I agree with what Tamar just said. It is really hard to change people's perceptions. But I guess I'm an optimist when it comes to journalism. I really think that a lot of the, for example, in Mexico, I live in a really small rural town. And most of my friends are new age hippies that do not believe in vaccines. And one thing that I have noticed is how little they consume good journalism, right? I believe in the power of journalism to change people's minds through storytelling, just because it creates a much more empathetic approach that could perhaps be helpful enough. But I think the main issue right now for me is the journalistic business model. Disinformation is free. Their business model, like all the way from, this super big story of the kids from Macedonia who are making a lot of money through Facebook disinformation. That's the model. It's clickbait. It's advertising based. It's free for the user and the reader. But journalism is expensive. It requires a subscription. More and more, it has paywalls. So either we come up with the resolution of making good journalism free, especially journalism that debunks disinformation, or we have to come up with a different journalism business model, because the current one is not working and disinformation is traveling way faster. I also believe, like I said in the presentation, in the notion of history in the making. So even if right now a lot of people don't believe actual facts and are still I don't know, drowning in the ocean of alternative facts or disinformation itself or pseudoscience, I do believe that setting the record straight must have an impact in the future. We are creating history, and when you're in the trenches, it's hard to see long term. But when you're putting a correction and when you're pushing for corrections, maybe in the near future, we will see things differently thanks to those corrections. So I think that's where I stand, but it's definitely a really complex problem, and I appreciate the question.
Absolutely. And I'd like to extend that, and an obvious following question, it seems to me, which is what the social media platforms are doing. Is it enough? Are they doing the right things, or is there more they could be doing? Could I ask that to, say, Tamar?
Sure. Actually, we have started partnership with Facebook on fact-checking program. I think it's necessary, but perception of this program is quite different because Facebook was not regulated at all. People were the perception was that this is a private space, and some fact checkers now are interfering in their private space, and there is a lack of understanding of this mechanism itself. And we have some data that people are actually our audience are expanded after this program, but there are some conservative groups less trustful towards us, and I think there is a need to explain this mechanism better. In addition, what Gisela said about the trust journalism, quality journalism, and the trust in media is also undermined, especially in transitional countries like Georgia, because government tries to create distrust and this information disorder. Everybody lies, everything is false. And in democracies, we need trustful information in order to make right choices. And media literacy, in addition, is a useful tool in order to equip people with necessary skills to filter harmful information in their minds rather than to restrict information, because it's perceived as some kind of censorship rather than providing alternative information in order to inform public properly.
Thank you, Tamar. And Gisela, yeah, it'd be great to hear your views on that as well.
Thanks, Alistair. Yeah, this is a really complex problem to me because it's always about which jurisdiction, like who gets to regulate Facebook and who gets to have a say in what Facebook does and says. I know they are partnering with fact-checking organizations all around the globe, but that still, to me, doesn't solve the algorithmic problem and the algorithmic bias on just how much more Facebook sells much more with rageful, emotional content that is often very present in propaganda and disinformation efforts. I think, from the platform perspective, it will never be enough. It will never be enough. Whatever they do will never be enough. It's sort of, I'm a definite pessimistic on this end. I think it's a little too late and the internet has been distorted. Hopefully not forever. But in that case, it's also sort of like, as soon as you were asking that question, Alistair, that wonderful, really well formulated question, I was thinking of the concept of techno-solutionism and how we think that it's either technology breaking democracy or it's technology making democracy. And it's really much more a social, very complex social problem that we're encountering. And it goes all the way from the business model. But I'm also wondering, like, how can we, I don't know, can we teach open source investigations, as sort of like a requisite in schools? Can we, but coming back to the digital literacy question, how do we teach people to think critically about information? It seems like, to me, taking the social approach can be way more powerful than trying to regulate, or who gets to regulate these big social media companies, and then whose voices matter in these regulation of private spaces. The ball tends to be kicked to the United States, which is fine as long as Democrats keep being in power, or if Democrats are in power. But I think what has been very scary about the United States regulating these companies is having a non-very democratic president, and just how much and or Congress, majority of sort of like right-leaning, more Congress. So then who gets to regulate it, right? And then who gets to keep Facebook accountable? A lot of governance issues also come up. So I think it might be time to think of, global citizenship in a more broad way, and how we can push back against Facebook without necessarily having to kick the ball to the United States with all the colonial tinctures that might have.
Thank you, Gisela. That's opening up so many more questions, which unfortunately time to answer on this particular episode. Maybe we can solve all those problems in the next Disruptive Friday on December the 10th, who knows. But it was a really interesting and fantastic discussion with Guli and Fasico, and of course Tamar and Gisela. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to the second half of the course, when we'll hear from Gisela with a 3-hour workshop on investigations, amongst other things. It was really great to hear from all of you, and thanks so much. And I'll hand back to Lika.
Yeah, thank you, Alistair. Also from my side, Tamar and Gisela, thanks so much for joining today. And also special thanks to Guli and Vasiko. It was really great also to hear from both of you. And also thanks to everybody who joined us today in the chat or online. And before we wrap up, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an update about what's coming up next at the Disruption Network Lab. So this year, the Disruption Network Lab worked also on an important book project in the context of whistleblowing. And this anthology has the title Whistleblowing for Change, and it includes text written by 30 participants of our conferences since 2015. And the book investigates whistleblowing as a developing political practice that has the ability to provoke social change. And the chapters feature contributions from many people. Some of the people are including Billy Winner-Davis, Brandon Bryant, Barrett Brown, John Kiriakou, Laurie Love, Annie Machon, and many others. So together with the launch of the book, we are organizing also a conference with some of the authors here in Berlin, but also via live stream. And we will discuss there the topics of the book. So this is happening from the 26th to the 28th of November in Berlin, Kunstkwartier Betania. And as I said, we also share a live stream. So we will start the conference with the German premiere of the film United States versus Reality Winner, which is a 2021 American documentary directed and produced by Sonia Kennebeck. And she'll be also there for a Q&A after the film. And then finally, for the FACING Disinformation project, we will have another Disruptive Fridays on the 10th of December. And there we will be discussing misinformation in the context of COVID-19. So we hope to see you there, of course. And for everyone that also got interested in what we're doing in the training program, and maybe also would like to join a more hands-on activity, we will have a workshop on the 8th of December. And there we will also go into some of the topics of the training program, but this is more focused on a Berlin-based / international audience. And we'll be announcing more details on this workshop on our website next week. So I would say keep an eye out on our website if you want to join that, and otherwise see you here again for either Disruptive Fridays or our conference. And thanks a lot for participating today.